In the CCSP domain 4, okay, the CCSP domain 4 is basically what we call as a cloud application security. And this domain is actually a very, very interesting domain because whatever we have discussed till now is all about the cloud platform, provider perspective, and consumer perspective and all. But this domain is about your application architecture. This domain is basically about your application and how it's basically hosted on the cloud platform. So this domain is having a so much relevancy on this, very important. So in this domain teams, to start with, the first topic is basically advocate the training and awareness of application security. Now, let's say for example, now you have an application. Okay, you have a legacy application, I will say. Okay, this application is basically hosted in the on-premises infrastructure. Okay, so when we have this application is hosted in the on-premise infrastructure, one major point we have to keep in mind is that this particular application is tested, developed, tested, and deployed with on-premises in mind. Like for example, do you remember any application hosted on your premises before 2015 or 16 with cloud tested? No, right? Whatever applications you currently have in your organization, which is a legacy applications, are tested for the on-premises. It is developed for the on-premises. It's completely developed, tested, and deployed for the on-premises. So how do you expect this application to work in the cloud? That's challenge, right? So that's one point we have to keep it. So whenever you basically go for an application architecture, one major point is that all the applications which are legacy in the business, most of them are basically designed with cloud in mind, so with on-premises. So when you try to move that application to cloud platform, when you try to migrate the application, or we can say when you try to move the application to cloud platform, it may not work as expected. You may find a lot of glitches and challenges when you're taking the application to the cloud platform. See, definitely when you say we are going to host everything in the cloud platform, regardless of DevOps or DevSecOps, whatever it is, regardless of either DevOps or DevSecOps, whatever it is, when you basically take something to cloud, it offers you a lot of benefits and efficiencies. At the same time, it also faces challenges. So one major challenge is that the compatibility issue, because this application may not work in the cloud platform like the same way it's working the on premises. So either you may have to find some options for customizing the application architecture, or you have to add some additional controls, or it takes some time to re-architect the entire application process. So it may take some time on the process. So it's not easy for us to basically do it that way. That is one thing which we have to always keep in mind. The second thing is basically what we call as a cloud development basics. See, there is a two organizations we are having. One is basically the Cloud Security Alliance, the CSA, and there is another entity called as a Safe Code. Okay. So as per them, the when talking about the cloud development, they have defined three golden things we have to keep in mind. Three key concepts we have to keep in mind while developing an application. First is basically what we call a security by design. What is security by design? Security by design means that security is not something which we have to add after the application is deployed in production. I repeat, security is not something which we have to do deploying after the application is deployed in production. But it's not an add-on. It's something which we have to add from the earlier phases, and it should be part of the entire application SDLC process. So security is not an add-on. It is not a bolt-in or add-on. It should be basically something which should be added as a part of the entire application from the early phases itself. It's not something which we have to do from the final step. Second most important point is basically what we call a shared security responsibility. When talking about the security responsibility, most people think that it's a responsibility of CISO or CTO or application owner or security engineer. So actually understand that security is not something like a responsibility of one single person. It's a shared responsibility. To always keep in mind, security is a shared responsibility. Okay, that's a very important point. It's a shared responsibility. The third most important thing is that team security is not an add-on. Normally, what we happen is that team when you basically go for a business, the business is having some business goals and objectives, right? And security is not something which is part of that business goal. But understand that security should be a part of the business objective. Okay, like regarding that in every ask activity or task they are performing, security should be an integral aspect of that. That's a very important point. So three concepts are there: security by design, where we have to make sure that security is an integral part of the entire application architecture when while developing the application, and it's a shared responsibility, not the responsibility of one single person. And third one is it's basically it should be a business objective. That's the three key points we have to keep in mind when talking about the cloud development basics. Then the next concept we talk about is basically the common pitfalls. Okay, common pitfalls means what? So basically, when you're developing an application to the cloud or for the cloud platform, there can be a lot of challenges you may face. For example, one thing is the migration challenges. What do you mean by migration challenge, team? Like, for example, you may not be able to take it to the cloud platform because you will face a lot of application compatibility or legacy issues. Then you have a lack of preparation for moving to the cloud platform, and then you have an issue with the support from the senior management. You have a lack of the understanding of the cloud shared responsibility model, lack of a proper secure development best practices, budgeting issues, lack of technical skills for your employees. Like this, you will find a lot of challenges. That is basically what we call as a common pitfalls when you basically talk about the application architecture. So those things should be properly, you should be aware of this, because when you basically go to the examination perspective as well, you should be aware of the first 2 points, especially that three concepts I have discussed with you, plus also the common pitfalls. You should be aware of that. And team, when developing an application, so team, have you heard about the any list of vulnerabilities we have? Yeah. So basically, what happens that team, that like the same way you have a OWASP top 10 for the applications and APIs and all, there is a lot of, and that is basically there in the cloud as well. Because I am taking an application to cloud doesn't mean that I'm having something different there. So what I'm having there is the team, the OWASP top 10 application architecture I'm having. Okay, the OWASP top 10 architecture I'm having. When I take it to the cloud platform, okay, when I take it to the cloud platform, there also have the same issues when the cloud, plus they introduce a lot of additional challenges. In the sense means they have a lot of challenges like a lack of challenges in application governance, multi-tenancy, then and various other like management console, lack of proper segregation. Like this, there's a lot of challenge, lack of control, a lot of challenges are there. So I would recommend you go through the textbook where it will help you to understand the additional vulnerabilities introduced by the cloud platform. That's a very important thing. Then I'm legal and all, for sure, everything. Yeah. Then the next thing is basically what? Describe the secure software development. So basically, normally what normally what happens is that team, whenever you basically go for an application development, we follow something called as a SDLC. So why we follow as SDLC? It's a secure process. SDLC is a proper step-by-step secure process for moving the or for developing the application from requirement gathering, design, development, testing, deployment. We have a process called as SDLC. But what is the problem with SDLC? SDLC don't think about security. One major problem is the team, they never think about security. Security is never their call, because we have a customer, the customer gives us some requirements, I want to satisfy that. Except those things which are given by the customer, there is no add-ons, there is no additional things which is basically there for the which is basically there by the cloud platform. So by the SDLC. So the problem is that when you are not thinking about security much, okay, when you're not thinking about security much, you will basically face a lot of challenges. Okay, you'll basically face a lot of challenges when you basically go to the cloud platform. So how do I address that, team? How do I address that? I can address that with the help of something called as a secure SDLC. So we have a process called as a secure SDLC. So what do you mean by secure SDLC? It's a process by which security should be a integral part of the entire process. It is not an add-on. Security should be a integral part of the entire process. That's the first and the most important thing you have to keep in mind. Security should be an integral part of the SDLC. So instead of talking about only the requirements of the customer, we should clearly understand that security should be a integral part of the entire process of the development process. Like for example, let's say when talking about the step of design, we have to make sure requirement gathering, we have to make sure that the security team is properly involved there. When talking about the step called as what is that design phase, we have to make sure we have to go for threat modeling. When we basically go for a process called as development, we have to go for the proper coding practices. We have to have a DAST, SAST, IAST. So basically security and the security testing mechanisms should be an integral part of the process. That's a very, very important, we have to keep in mind. That's basically what we call a secure SDLC, and that's a most important thing we have to keep in mind. Okay, like that. And also you have to you have to have a basic understanding of one thing, team. You should have a basic understanding of the process. Like in the process, in the sense means like you should understand how this SDLC works. Like there are multiple models for SDLC. Like we have something called as a Scrum, Kanban, Waterfall, Agile. We have different models are there. You have to go for the Agile model and the different subcategories of that. That's a very important thing. So these are the first two modules of the domain 4. So what I will tell you one thing, team. Whenever a person say that in CCSP there are some particular areas confusing or challenging for them, I have seen that this is the most important thing. This is the one which basically gives them the most challenge. The reason why this is basically become most challenge is because now this is basically this is basically coming from the what we can say, again a different perspective, not in the cloud, right? If you're a cloud person, you may not have been aware of the SDLC or the entire stuff in SDLC there, right? So that can be a challenge, but again, this domain is super important for us. You will get a lot of questions from this domain, especially from the OWASP top 10. Maybe you will also get questions regarding cloud vulnerabilities, the various challenges in cloud development, from a secure SDLC. A lot of questions you will get for sure. And again, the DevOps and DevSecOps, those kind of things are very important for you to understand for the examination. So, Harshini, that is just regarding the perspective. That's all, nothing more. Okay, it's just regarding the perspective. Fine, team. The next one is basically what, team? The next one is basically regarding applying the secure SDLC. What do you mean by applying secure SDLC? Applying secure SDLC means that now let's suppose that we are having an application which is basically there in the cloud platform. Okay. So, and I told you that we are following an approach called a secure SDLC, where we talk about security in the every phase of the SDLC. Where so there you should be aware that while designing, developing, testing, and deploying an application in the cloud platform, what are the key challenges we additionally face in the cloud? That's very important to understand the specific key challenges we are additionally facing in the cloud. That's something which we have to be aware of. Like also the various framework which can basically help us in this process, like this what is the name, ISO 27034 is also very important. NIST is having those things are very important to understand. Plus, also you have to be aware of the concept of uh, you know threat modeling. So always keep in mind in the exam also they may have a questions regarding threat modeling for sure. But understand that threat modeling is a very important process which is coming as a part of the design phase of the SDLC. It's a very important thing to understand. Even though there are multiple phases involved in it, threat modeling is basically something primarily coming as a part of the design phase of the SDLC. That's a very important point you have to keep in mind. And you have to be aware of some of the top common threat models. Like you have a what are the different types we are having, team? Stride, Dread, Pasta, Octave, a lot of things are there, right? So at least you should be aware of the Stride model and its application. You may get scenario questions on the examination regarding. They may give you a scenario and they will ask you like, oh, in the Stride model, what does what the scenario is focusing on the Stride model, like that. Maybe you'll get a question. Maybe get a question on that. Also, you have to be aware of something called as a concept of secure coding. What is secure coding? So when you're basically developing an application, what are the best practices you have to follow when writing a code on the application? What is the criticality or importance of having a configuration management versioning? Team, anybody aware of the reason why we are having a versioning for an application?
Right.
So when there is a lot of updates coming to the application, you should be able to track the changes, right? The goal of the application versioning is to make sure that you have a complete track and control of the changes happening to the application, like what all things are added, what all bugs are fixed, what all issues are addressed. Those kind of things are very important when talking about the word called as a versioning. So that are also SCM, software configuration management, is also very important, which will help us to have a track and controlling of configuration changes to that. So that's something which we have to be aware. So these things you don't have to go in detail in depth, but you should be aware of the what is a practical reason why we are having a versioning. Simple thing. Right. Then basically, the one major thing they are telling you is that there is a word called as functional and non-functional testing. Okay. We have a word called as functional and non-functional testing. So what is the difference between functional and non-functional testing, team? This is basically very, very important, and maybe it can be important for the examination. Okay. So when talking about the word called as functional testing, okay, functional means that it verifies what the software is supposed to do. Okay, it verifies what the software is supposed to do. Like for example, I will give you some requirements, and basically if this particular application is able to meet the requirements. For example, let's say I want to test something called as a login functionality. So what, give me an example of login. So basically what I'll do, so whenever there is a user who enters the proper username and password and click on login, what should happen? It should basically allow the user to log in. If there is a user who is entering an incorrect username and password, he should be he should be getting a message, error message, right? Like the same way, just in case if the user tried to enter the username and password, and if the username is too short when you're trying to create a username, that should show you error like that. So when there is a user who is searching for something, he should be able to get the proper search results. When a person is trying to enter a date of birth in a column, it should not basically show error. Like the same way, that is called as a functional testing. So functional testing is a scenario when we are trying to basically ensure that the application is doing what it's supposed to do. That's a functional testing. And we have we have basically functional, and the next one is non-functional testing. What is non-functional testing, team? Non-functional testing means that it is something basically talking about how the software performs in terms of performance, usability, that appearance, aesthetics, reliability, and all. Okay. For example, let's say now one thing I'll tell you. So I will tell you two scenarios, team. You tell me which one, if it is functional or non-functional. User trying to log in. Okay, user trying to log in. He enter the proper username and he enter the proper password and he is able to log in. What is that, functional or non-functional testing? User is able to log in without any issue. That is functional testing. Perfect. That is a functional testing. Now, there is 100 or 1,000 users who try to log in simultaneously, which is basically getting an error. Okay, simultaneously, huge number of concurrent users are trying to access the application to log in, like doing a load testing or stress testing. So that, tell me, what is that, a functional, non-functional testing? It's a non-functional testing with like a load testing or stress testing, right? Like that. Then then so basically, let's say for example, a user is trying to log in and he is able to log in, but it takes a lot of time for login. So what is it, functional, non-functional? Takes a lot of time to log in. Functional, non-functional? Non-functional. That is non-functional testing, right? Because the function is he is able to log in or not. Yes, he's able to log in, but taking time. So that is non-functional, right? Like that. Now like that, like for example, so there is a lot of testing we are having when talking about functional, non-functional team. Okay, like basically if you go for unit testing, integration testing, smoke testing, regression testing, UAT, user acceptance, all these are functional testing. If you basically go for something called as a non-functional, this performance testing, security testing, usability testing, reliability testing, portability testing, recovery testing, those are non-functional. So in for especially, what I always tell you is the team, you should be aware of the concept of what is a unit testing, what is a integration testing, what is a smoke testing, what is a regression testing. You should be aware of this. You don't have to memorize in depth, but you should be aware of this. Very important to understand. Okay. Also, it is very important for you to understand the concept of static testing, dynamic testing, and IAST. SAST, DAST, and IAST. Most important for you to understand. Okay, don't forget, we have a concept of a SAST, DAST, and IAST. So what is the difference? Uh, so that's a very important thing to understand, team. So how do I understand this, team? When talking about the SAST, what is a key thing? SAST is basically where you're testing the code for vulnerabilities. I repeat, SAST is a process where you're testing the code for vulnerabilities. Okay, you're not testing the application, it's a kind of a white box testing. SaaS is testing a process where you're not running it as an application, but the code is reviewed. That is basically what we call as a SAST, or static application security testing. Then we have something called as a DAST, or dynamic testing, or dynamic application security testing, where you're testing a running application for vulnerabilities. Okay, DAST, or you're testing a running application for one. That's a DAST, or dynamic application security testing. That's a very important thing. Then we have something called as a interactive application testing. So the DAS is a black box where we are not getting access to the code, right? It's a running testing. And what is the IAST, or interactive application security testing, team? So when you say IAST, or interactive application security testing, it means that, let me give an example. Now, uh, When you basically go for IAST, you are testing it like a DAST. I repeat the simple first point. When you're testing the IAST, you are testing it like like a DAST. You are testing a running application, but you will be able to trace back to the modules or the code which is causing the issue. I repeat, when you basically go for something called as IAST, you are doing the same kind of a process like what we do for what, like we do for this DAST, but the only difference is that if you basically go for this, IAST, you are able to trace back to which particular part or unit of the code has caused the issue. Okay, so that's basically so relevant and so basically helpful. Okay, that's a very, very important thing to understand. Okay, that's a SAST. So that's a IAST. So interactive application security testing. Okay. Now, the next is we have something called as SCA or software composition analysis. What is this SCA or software composition analysis team? SCA means that, or software composition analysis means that whenever you basically have an application, okay, so the application may have a lot of components we use additionally, right? For example, let's say now in the application we may use a lot of open source or third party components, libraries, frameworks, etc. Why do we use different modules or plugins, etc., while writing a code? Anybody aware of that? So if I develop everything by ourselves, it can take a lot of time, it can take a lot of efforts, and it can make me in trouble. So what I will do is that instead of making that headache, I will basically develop an app. I will basically develop the application with a lot of third party components like open source, or maybe like many other components, open source components, or we can say the you know like other third party components there. So the problem is that when you basically go for that, what happens if those frameworks or libraries are having some issue? Like, let me rework on my question, the point one more time. So whenever we basically talk about using a particular framework or plugin for while developing my application, what if there is some kind of a vulnerability? What if there is some kind of a weakness in there or loophole in that particular thing we are using? It will make my application compromise, right? First problem. Second thing is that what if there is a separate licensing term for that particular uh, you know plugin or framework that can affect the licensing of my application, right? So like that, the SCA is a process and tools we use to identify and analyze the open source and third party components within a software application, to identify vulnerabilities, to manage license compliance, to have a code quality and health, like a lot of purpose we have for the SCA. Then we need to have a proper quality assurance. Then the next one is also very important for your team, which is basically in that new curriculum when they added in 2022, which is called as abuse case testing. What do you mean by abuse case testing, team? Abuse case testing means that, let's take an example here. Now, I'm currently let's say uh, developing an application. Normally, we when we are testing the application, we test it based on test cases, right? We test the applications based on test cases. So when we are testing the application based on test cases, there is a possibility that those are basically based on the functionality requirements, right? But what if we need to basically test from an attacker perspective or a negative mindset? I will give you an example for that. So for example, let's say this is a common example I say in every batch. For example, let's say assume that you have a mobile phone. Okay, you have a mobile phone which is supposed to be water resistant or waterproof. Okay, there is a mobile phone that the manufacturer is claiming to be waterproof. So team, how do you test if the mobile phone is waterproof? Tell me. If you are the tester person, how do you test if the mobile phone is waterproof or not? You put it in water, that's all. You just put this in water for this maybe like for a few minutes, or how much they are saying, in a particular depth, and if it withstands, that passed, right? That is basically how you expect. But let's say for example, I am the user. I take the mobile phone and put it in hot coffee. I put the mobile phone in boiling hot water. I put the mobile phone in salt water. See, again, it's water only, right? That's abuse case testing. Thinking in the perspective of attack, like thinking like, so basically those are basically like not only pre-scripted scenarios. Okay, that's basically not a pre-scripted scenario. That's a whole point to understand. Okay. So in a simple words, when you talk about the word class abuse case testing, it's trying to focus on identifying the vulnerabilities and potential misuses of a system by simulating malicious or unwanted interactions to the application. Okay, like that. Perfect team. So let's get moving to the next module. So in the domain 4, we have the next module is basically what we call as use verified secure software. Again, team, this is one major thing which we have to keep in mind when you're learning this part of the examination perspective. This is one major thing which we have to keep in mind. Why? Because the entire cloud is relying on APIs. The entire cloud is relying on APIs. So APIs is one of the most important thing you have to understand. Application programming interface or APIs. Okay, so you should know, you don't have to go so much technical on this because you're a CCSP, you're a cloud security professional, you're not the programmer there. So there's no point of going through this in depth on to the, dig into the depth. There's no need of doing that. But instead of doing that, what we have to do is that when you basically go for something called as a API, okay, when you basically do something called as an API, what we have to do is that you have to actually understand what is an API, how the API works in a cloud side. Basically, whatever request you are making, the API is the one who basically take it to the orchestration layer. You should know that the APIs are there. Then you should know that the API is basically having a host base of two types, that is the REST API and SOAP API. And you should understand that which what the differences are very important, team. Again, you should know that Rust is a more simplified version. Rust do not have an inbuilt security mechanism and how the Rust is working. Also, you should know the SOAP API. What is it? SOAP have inbuilt security? Like the same way, just make sure you go through that Rust and SOAP difference, because in the examination perspective, it is very important for you to learn the difference between Rust and SOAP. Just make sure you learn the difference between Rust and SOAP API. Very, very important for you to understand. Okay.
Okay, REST
Next,
and SOAP.
SOAP,
Okay,
Simple
there two
Object Access
types of
Protocol.
API.
Simple Object Access Protocol, and REST stands for Representational State Transfer.
Okay, okay.
When you basically go for the APIs, there is a lot of mechanisms for securing the APIs, including like we have a tool, the OWASP. We have a OWASP top 10 for the APIs. We should see whenever you go for an API. Let me tell you some points on this. Let's say, for example, when you go for an API, whenever the default API is given by the provider, it's their responsibility for securing it. But at the same time, when you use a third-party APIs for your application on the cloud and all, the biggest challenge we are having is that this APIs, we don't have a visibility over it, right? I'll give you an example there. Let's suppose that now we have this is my application here. Okay, this is my website or web application here. Okay, so in this website or application we are having, we want to have a Google map. Okay, we want to get a Google Maps here. So I can't get the entire Google map code here, right? So what I will do, from the from Google, what I will do, I will get a simple small piece of code called as Google Map API. I'll put the code here, and it will bring the entire functionality of Google Map to my application, like you have it in Uber and all, right? Like the same way. Now, if this API is not secure, if the API is compromised, if the API is not secure, what will happen? It can lead to application compromise. So we should make sure that there should be a secure process for onboarding the APIs. Like the same way in your company, you have a process for onboarding your application. You are having a proper testing process for onboarding your application. For APIs also, you should have a proper secure onboarding process. It's a very, very important thing to have a secure onboarding process for your application. Very, very important for you to understand. The second thing is that when you basically have an API, the API should be continuously evaluated and approved before it can be used in production, and you should test it regularly like that. Okay, these are the key things which we have to keep in mind. And always keep in mind, if the APIs are insecure, it can lead to application insecurity as well, for sure. So that is basically, we can use different tools for that. We have a mechanisms, like we can do the API, we can go for something called as a OWASP top 10 for APIs and all. You don't have to go so much technical on this to learn all those things, because why? Because see, in CCS we should know that there should be a process for securing the APIs. That's all. Means you don't have to basically learn about the entire process for securing the APIs one by one. Means again, the testing process we don't have to know like that. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the next one is basically what we call a supply chain management. What is supply chain management, team? Supply chain management, I'll give an example. Now, supply chain means what? In a simple word, supply chain means that. So let's say, for example, we have an application. Let's say this is we have an organization here. So we want to develop an application. So I outsource my requirements to another company. Okay. I want to develop an application. I outsource my requirement to another company. This company is outsourcing some other part of it to this another company, and this company is giving it to another company. So if something happens here, some vulnerability happens here, it will travel here. go to here. At the end, it will affect my organization, right? That's a supply chain issue. Okay, that's a very common thing which can. Like the same way, when you're basically developing an application, for example, let's say now we have an application here, and let's say, for example, I'm using an API here. So what will happen? So if this API is given by another company, okay, we have my customers here. This is my company, and this API is given by another is basically given by another company, and this company is using some other companies there. So if there is any issue happens here, it will entirely compromise my application and it will affect me only, right? So making sure when you're onboarding a vendor, you should basically evaluate the vendor based on some criteria. That's basically what we call a supply chain management. The same topic is coming in the domain 4 and domain 6 as well. Okay, then basically we have to understand that whenever we are basically onboarding an application, one major thing is the third party software management, because the licensing and all the things regarding onboarding an application, that's a third party software management, is a very important thing we have to understand. Then again, when using application, use of open source components also is a very important thing. This is basically just an overview you have to understand from this particular module. The most important thing you have to keep understand here is the API part. You should be aware that the API types and all. Okay. I'm not going in depth on that because again, it will take a lot of time for us. So I'm just giving an overview. That's all. Okay. The next is basically comprehending the specific of cloud application architecture. So whenever you're basically using an application in the cloud platform, it is a very important challenge that the application security components. One major thing is basically the WAF. So team, I hope all of you know the difference between WAF and normal firewall. In a quick overview, can anyone define the difference between WAF and normal firewall, team? A quick overview from the difference between WAF and normal firewall. Okay, so when you basically go for a firewall, team, when talking about the normal firewall, which is talking about the layer 3 or layer 4 firewalls, both functionalities can be available, either WAF or normal firewall. Both can be available in hardware and software. But when talking about the firewall, normal firewalls are working in the layer 3 or layer 4 firewalls, which is basically where it filters with the packet based on port protocol, port number, source IP, destination IP, etc. And they don't basically work inside based on the cookies or the packets and etc. At the same time, if you go for web application firewall, that is something which can go a slightly bit advanced, which can filter traffic based on the layer 7 on the application layer. That means it can review the packets and filter based on the packets, like to prevent against attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and multiple other attacks. The WAF is something which can basically protect you from some series of layer 7 attacks. So basically, let's say for example, now you have a packet coming from a location. If you go for a normal firewall, it can only protect based on the protocol, port number, source IP, destination IP, etc. But say if you go for web application firewall, it can basically protect you from multiple sophisticated attack which can possibly happen inside using the application packets inside. Okay, that's a layer 7 thing, application layer thing. Then we have something called as a DAM or database activity monitor, which can basically monitor all the queries and requests coming to your particular databases. It's a functionality now which is there for almost every enterprise databases as a part of it. Then what is XML firewall, team? XML firewall is a very, very simple thing actually. So when you're talking about the word called as XML firewall, it means that it is a kind of a firewall, okay, that is specialized on focusing securing applications that uses the XML for communication. See, now let's say for example, when you talk about multiple APIs or multiple things, many of the things use API, means this XML, which stands for extended markup language. Do you know why many communication happen via XML? I'll give you a simple example. Now, let's say you have an application here which is communicating to another server or another application server. Okay, now this is basically by your company, this is basically by another company. Now, do I have any guarantee that these two applications these do I have any guarantee that these two applications are or written on the same language? Can I always ensure that these two applications are on the same language? No, right? So in that case, what happens? As I can't ensure that this is the same, I can use XML for communication, because XML is a language which is platform and language independent. XML is a language which is platform and language independent. As they are platform and language independent, okay, they are something which is basically, they are something which basically can also be vulnerable for multiple attacks. So XML firewalls are something which is basically focused on securing applications that are using XML for communication, okay, like that. And always, and like the same way we have a web application firewall, XML firewall also operates in the application layer. XML firewall also operates in the application layer. Okay, just have to understand, that's all. Then then we have the API gateway. So team, this is a very important point. Okay, API gateway is always a critical topic when you basically go for CCSP, because I have seen this multiple times in many discussions and all. API gateway is a very important thing. So when talking about the API gateway, let's say for example you have an application. Okay, but whenever there is a request coming to the application, we have multiple concerns. Okay, whenever there is a request coming to the application, we have multiple concerns. What is the concern number one? Okay, is the request coming to my application is properly authenticated? Is the request coming to my application is properly authenticated? Is the request coming to my application is properly authorized? Do they have permission to make the request? How many number of requests? How many number of requests is coming to my application? To which server I have to forward the request? Like this, for all these questions coming up, to solve it easily, you can put, so this is if this is your application, you can put an API gateway in front of it. So basically by putting an API gateway, what happens, team, it acts like a reverse proxy, I can say. That means when a request is coming to the API gateway, first of all it verifies the API request coming, whether it's they are authorized to send the request. Then also it basically uh, help you to make sure that limit the number of requests coming to the application simultaneously. It always try to limit or help us to limit the number of requests coming to the application simultaneously. Also, it will help us to basically have a proper authorization and authentication for the request, and forwarding the request to the particular exact correct backend services, like that. All these things can be done by API gateway. Whenever I talk about the modern application architecture, the API gateway is a core component of it. Okay, that is testimonial the exam, a very important team. Also, you have to keep in mind when you basically go for multiple interviews as well. You don't have to know it technically, but in a management perspective, you should aware that this is basically a very important topic to understand. Okay, the next one is that team we have something called as a cryptography, obviously talking about the encryption and all. Then we have a sandboxing. So sandboxing means what, team? This is a common term you will hear actually when talking about the application and all. Now let's say for example, what is the reason why I don't test an application or a particular new piece of application or a new version of application in my production? It not safe. It may contain malware. It can make the things unsafe. It can basically increase security threats. It can open new vulnerabilities, right? To avoid that, what we do is that we have a process called as a sandboxing. So sandboxing means what? We are creating a isolated virtual environment. Don't forget, when it is a sandbox, we are creating a isolated virtual environment to run any kind of untrusted program or code or file. So what is the benefit there? When you basically run that untrusted program or code or file in a completely isolated environment, whatever harm happens, it will be always limited inside that particular sandbox you create. Like especially when you go to cloud, it's more easy. Like you can create virtual machines or you can create PaaS platforms, which is completely separate. And whatever compromise happen, whatever issue happen, stays within that system or network. It won't basically go to the production like that. Okay, the next is basically we have something called as a concept of application virtualization. Okay, what is this application virtualization? So that's a name you have not much heard first, but again, so application virtualization is a scenario where I want to basically to have an application which is running, okay, and which we encapsulate the application from the underlying operating system. So don't forget, the application virtualization is a scenario where I want to make sure that I'm able to encapsulate my application separately from my underlying operating system where it's running. Okay, that's what basically we call it as a application virtualization. Now tell me, team, which one is basically nowadays, what is the best place where I can run an application completely encapsulated without affecting the underlying operating system? Containerization. Containers can basically help us to run our applications with completely pre-packaged without depending on the underlying operating or without depending or without getting connected to the underlying operating system. Is it clear, team? That's a very important point. So when you say application virtualization, it's a software technology that help us to encapsulate our application from the underlying operating system where it's running. And basically, you don't have to worry about the application dependency. It's already pre-packed. That's a containers. Okay. Then we have something called as microservices, basically like serverless is an example, where we don't have a server to work with. We don't have to worry about that. It's basically the provider's responsibility for providing servers and platform. We just has to run the code based on a trigger. That's called as a serverless, right? Like that. So, team, like the same way we have all these things. Okay, this is basically very important for us, team. When talking about identity access management, it is very important for to learn about as I told in the domain one. In here also, you have to learn about authentication, authorization, accountability. Also, we have to learn about the concept of two most important things. One is federation, and one is SSO. There are so two things to understand. One is basically what we call as federation. One is what we call as SSO. When you basically go for federation, what do you mean by the team? Federation is basically the process of, you know, using one identity from one domain to authenticate and authorize in another domain. Like for example, let's say using your Facebook ID, you are able to log into some websites, right? You're using your Gmail ID, you are able to log into multiple other applications, right? Like that's basically what we call as a federation. Okay, so federation is a process of doing that particular perspective. But if you go for SSO, what do you mean by the team? It's a single sign-on where using one single set of credentials, user can avoid logging in multiple times. So for example, let's say for example, we have a corporate application number one here. We have a corporate application number two here. We have a corporate application number three here. And so basically what happens, team? So using one set of credentials, I'm able to log into all these things. Okay. And without re-entering that, that's basically what we call as a SSO. And especially when you go to cloud and all, this SSO federation is a very, very common concept you have to understand. And in the SSO, there are three components. In the SSO and federation, we have three components. One is identity provider, one is service provider, one is a principal. Who is the identity provider? Like for example, you log in with your Facebook credentials, or you log in with a Gmail credential to website. So you are the principal. Facebook, where you have the identity, is called as identity provider. With the website you're trying to log in is called as a service provider. So you should know about the concept of IDP, identity provider, service provider, and principle. Also understand the difference between federation and SSO. Then understand that whenever you talk about identity and access management in the cloud, it's very important for you to have something called as a multi-factor authentication, because MFA is a very important concept, right? At the end of the day, if you want to have proper security, one major concept which can help you for achieving that is basically the multi-factor authentication. So that's about the domain 14, which is called as application security. Even though you may feel this domain is basically, this domain is basically something which is completely a bit slightly different from what you have learned before, but I would recommend that you have to give more critical importance to this domain, because there may be many questions coming from this domain which may confuse you. So please make sure you review this domain thoroughly. Okay, that's it. Now, team, let's go to the domain 5 of the CCSP examination, which is the cloud security operations. Now, again, this domain also from the cloud provider perspective. Simple. This domain is also from the cloud provider perspective. Okay. Now, when you say this domain is from the cloud provider perspective, what do you mean by that? So again, I told you right in domain 3, the same way. Here, what basically happens that uh, when you basically go for the domain 5, okay, here we talk about how what are the various security components or security mechanisms they have for operating a cloud infrastructure. Even it's contained customer perspective as well, but primarily a lot of things on the provider perspective. Like for example, what is a HSM device? What is a TPM? Very important to understand. HSM stands for hardware security module, which is basically a device for storing your key files in a hardware. What is the standard which we have to remember with HSM? Anyone remember it from yesterday session? The standard you have to remember with this HSM? FIPS, Federal Information Processing Standards 140-2. And understand, team, HSM should always be a physical device. When you say HSM, it's a physical device. But if you basically go for TPM, it can be physical or virtual. When you basically go for a appliance in the cloud, there is a virtual TPM as well available. VTPM. It's a kind of a thing in your hard. It's a chip in your hardware, which is basically helping you to store your uh, you know uh, key files, website certificates, and also TPM can be virtual or physical. HSM can be only virtual. The second thing they will talk about is basically the various mechanisms we can have for security. Like the same way we have a physical hardware, we also have a virtual hardware, right? Like for example, when you go for cloud, do you know what you call that virtual network we are creating? If you basically go for on-premises, we are able to create a physical network, right? Like the same way, when you basically go to the cloud platform, you create something called as a virtual network. What do you call that virtual network you create in the cloud? It's called as it's basically have different names like VPC, or it's also called as VNet, etc. So that's a very important thing. Then for the firewall, you have a name called as security group or NSG in Azure. That's also so like that. Those understand those kind of concepts very important. Then when you say virtual hardware, there also you have a network, storage, CPU, and everything, right? But provided you virtually, right? And when you say you're a virtual using a virtual hardware, if you want to get the maximum functionality out of a virtual hardware, you should have a proper tools for installing that. Like for example, if you are a VMware guy, you have heard about the VMware tools. What is the thing? So if you want to get that VMware, the VM you are running on the VMware system properly, you will install the VMware tool set, right? Like that, those kind of things. Okay. Okay, that's a very important thing. So the next one is the team. Again, the next one is guaranteed. Very, very important for you to understand. Again, understand the various mechanisms for accessing the cloud platform. What are the various mechanisms used by the cloud service provider and cloud service consumer? Okay, what are the various mechanisms used by the cloud service provider and cloud service consumer for accessing the cloud platform? That's a very, very important thing. Then various security mechanisms use network like VLANs. So, team, tell me what is the what is basically the difference between SSL and TLS? So every version of SSL is having some kind of vulnerabilities. So we go for a TLS, right? We basically go for a TLS, right? Then, which stands for transport. What is the latest version of TLS? Version 1.3, right? That's a very important thing to understand. Then you have to understand the TLS handshake process. That's a very interesting thing to learn. Also, will be questions on DNS. Like DNS tech stands for DNS security extension. It's a security extension to protect your DNS servers. Okay, so even though it's not that much, but I would recommend that you can understand some various DNS attacks like DNS poisoning or those kind of things. It's good to know. That's all. Okay. And what is the primary goal of a VPN team? What is the primary goal of a VPN? The primary goal of VPN is secure data in transit. You are creating a secure tunnel in the network or from on-premise to cloud or some between two different networks or systems so that you will be able to have a safe communication like you do it locally. Okay. That's basically what we call as a VPN. That's a very important thing to understand. We have different protocols like IPsec, etc., for doing that. Then you should understand the concept of what is in a security group, honeypots, and those kind of things. Just have to be aware of that. And one guaranteed exam point in the exam is that team. You should be aware of the concept of baselining. What is the reason why we are doing a baselining? So that baselining help us to have a proper understanding, and if there is any deviations happen, you will be able to have a uh, you know understanding of the deviations can possibly happen from a baseline. Okay, that's a very, very important point to understand. Then, okay, see, the next one is basically what we call as a concept of patch management. So always keep patch management a very important thing because lack of proper patch management can lead to a lot of vulnerabilities. So basically, patch management is a very important activity. We should make sure that there is a proper approval process for patch management. We should do so. Once we have a proper approval process, we do for patch management. It helps us to make sure that we are able to get a proper security posture. That's a very important thing. Then what is the difference between going for a single server or a clustered host? If I basically go for a single server, I don't have a high availability or fault tolerance. But if I go for a clustered host, I can basically get a proper assurance regarding the availability of things. Because let's say, for example, we have 100 piece of server or 100 piece of servers in a cluster, and tomorrow if I'm deploying a VM on top of it, even though if there is any kind of underlying VMs fail, we are able to deploy it properly. That's a very important thing. Then we have something called as a performance and capacity monitoring. We want to make sure that we should get a proper performance every time. What is the minimum document for assuring the performance team? What is the minimum guarantee document for assuring the performance in cloud? SLA is a minimum guarantee document for assuring performance in cloud. That's a very, very important thing to understand. Now, The next thing is that this is basically very important for the examination. You should be aware of these concepts. Like we have a change. What is a change management? Change management means I want to make sure I'm able to have a uh, proper change, which so that I will whatever activity I'm performing should be taken through a proper change management, and it will make sure that whatever is happening in my business, I have a proper track of activities and I can reduce the impact. That's the reason we have a change management. Then I want to have a proper business continuity. The process for doing the business continuity is called as a business continuity management. Then we have a ISMS. Then we have a service management. Incident. What is a primary goal of incident management? The primary goal of incident management is to restore the operation as soon as possible and to reduce the impact. That's what we call as a incident management. Then we have a problem management where we want to make sure that we are able to identify the root cause of a problem and fix it. We want to identify the root cause of an issue and fix. That's what we call as a problem management. And when I am releasing a new version of my application, I want to make sure that the new version is properly tested and released on a proper perspective without affecting my production. That's a release management and deployment management. Then we have a configuration management to make sure that we are able to have a proper track of configuration. So I should be aware of what is happening in my business. I want to have a proper track of all the actions happening in my business. It's called as a availability management. Then we have a capacity management where we talk about the capacity. That means what capacity means, that we are where we talk about the the capacity which we need for running our business in a proper way. So I would recommend that we should basically dig deeper on this in the cloud perspective. This is basically very, very important for the examination perspective. I'm just giving a quick overview only here. Okay. The next one is the team. We have a concept of forensics. In fact, forensics is a very important topic to understand. What is the primary goal of forensic team? So primary goal of forensics is to basically identify the evidence. So it's a process where science meets law. And when you're talking about forensics, we have a process called as a digital forensics, or computer forensics, where we want to collect and identify the evidences. So you should have to be aware of the concept of a forensics, just not the entire forensic process, but how forensics can be done in cloud. Because if you go to cloud, you have a lot of problems like lack of visibility, lack of control, and all. So basically, what happens, as you have a lack of visibility and lack of control, etc., forensic can be challenging. And basically, if you want to have proper forensics, you should make sure that you contact your vendor accordingly. You contact your vendor and basically have a proper contractual agreement accordingly, right? Like that. Okay. Now, team, the next one is that basically we have a community relevant party. So basically now, how to ensure that we have a proper community with relevant parties like vendors. Vendors means the one who provide the services to the cloud service provider, the customers. The partners means the one who basically support the cloud journey. Regulators basically with the authorities, which basically do the auditing and assessment of the cloud platform. Like that, how they ensure that they are properly aligned. That's very important thing. Then the next is basically we have a concept of SOC. Team, what is the primary goal of a security operation center? Always keep in mind that SOC is a centralized process in your business for monitoring, detecting, analyzing, and responding to the various threats in your organization, including they will do threat hunting, security posture management, security monitoring, alerting, fixing, a lot of defending, a lot of things they do, right? So basically, SOC is a very just understand the concept. And what is a SIM tool? It's a very important thing to know what is the purpose of a SIM tool. Like SIM tool is something which will help us to analyze the log files, right? And give you alerts. Then you should know about the difference between VA and PT. Vulnerability assessment is the process of identifying known vulnerabilities, and penetration testing is the process of trying to see if the vulnerabilities can be exploited. That's a very important thing to understand. So honeypot or honeynet is basically a network or a system which will fake the real system or network. So what will happen as we have a fake system or network there? So it will basically help us to make sure that when the attacker is trying to attack, he will that is a fake network. So basically, it will look like real. So the attacker, when they try to compromise, they will fall into this trap. But the
Okay.
primary goal of the honeypot or honeynet is not just trapping the attacker, but more than trapping the attacker, the primary goal of a honeypot or honeynet is to you know uh, to identify, or we can say to identify the latest techniques used by the attackers to compromise like that. So team, the last domain which we're having is basically what we call as a domain 6, which is called as a legal risk and compliance. So when talking about the domain called as legal risk and compliance, one thing to keep in mind is that people have a confusion like, Krish, I'm going for something called as a uh, you know uh, like in this domain, fields were so dry or so small. Actually, it's very important, team. Okay, this domain is very important. Even though it's a more legal domain, it's very important to understand. Again, you should understand that when you basically go to a cloud platform, one major challenge you're having is that having a lot of conflicting regulations and standards. Because, like for example, let's say we have a customer who is basically working in India. Okay, we have a customer who is working in India, and we have the employees. Okay, we have the employees who is basically working from a different country. We have the data center in different locations. So, like when you have a lot of places where your company operates, which law will be applicable there? It will be a challenge, right? So, when you go to cloud, the one of the challenges that the various regulations and standards you have to comply with, which can be conflicting for you. That's a very important thing. Second thing is that you should understand the various legal risk which is basically provided by the cloud, like risk of various laws applicable, the lack of various controls and all like this. There is a lot of challenges there. Then what is e-discovery? E-discovery is a process of forensics only for law. The process of doing forensics for legal purposes called as a e-discovery or electronic discovery. Then understand that, team, we have a word called as contractual and regular data. So basically, there are two things to understand. What is the difference between contractual and regular data, team? Contractual means that when you're storing a data, as per our contract, what level of privacy and security we have to provide is called as contractual. I repeat. So let's say, for example, we both work as a part of a companies. We are storing data. Okay. Now the agreement between us, the contractual agreement between us regarding the storage of data is basically what we call as a contractual agreement. And what is a regulated? As per the law, what all level of permissions we have to put is what we call as a regulated. Okay, like that. Then then we have something called as a various country specific. So basically understand that you should be very much aware of the various law of regulations and laws for privacy for various countries like GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, then SOX, I mean SOC or SOX, then PIPDA, like this. You should GLPA. You should be aware of this. You don't have to memorize everything in detail, but it's very important for you to understand these laws and regulations very well. Just understand and see if it's applicable or how which all things are available for G or align with GDPR or not. Okay, very important, like that. So, team, the next word which we are having is called as privacy impact assessment. Okay, so what is a privacy impact assessment, team? So when talking about the word called as privacy, it's a process which we use to identify and evaluate the privacy of a cloud, or basically the where we store our personal information. Like when you basically go for a cloud platform, the providers have a document called as a PIA document, which will help us to understand the level of privacy which can be offered by the cloud service provider. Okay, like that. Then in this domain, team, they will definitely ask you regarding the auditing. What is the primary goal of auditing? When you do auditing, means what is the primary goal? Why we are performing audit? That's a very important thing. What is the audit scope statement? That means what is the why? What is the scope of auditing? What is the audit scope statement? That means what is the primary goal of auditing? So if somebody asks you what is the primary goal of auditing, team, what you will say? The primary goal of auditing is to identify the gap. To identify the gap, where most very important thing to understand. Okay, then the process of auditing, if you can get an overview of that, that's basically definitely good. Okay, that's a very very important thing to understand. The next thing is that also you have to understand basically the like when talking about auditing and all, basically what is the goal, what is the purpose of policy for auditing, who are the people who should be involved as a part of auditing, what are the specific requirements you have to follow when doing that. And especially when you go to cloud, you have a lot of locations where you host your data, right? So how it can impact your business, all these things you should be basically aware of that. Now now the next thing is that there is something called as a implications of risk management. So you should be aware of the concept between risk, vulnerability and threat. First of all, you have to understand the difference between risk, vulnerability and threat. What is the difference, team? So let me give you an example. Vulnerability means a weakness. Vulnerability means a weakness. Risk and threat is a action which exploit the vulnerability. I repeat, vulnerability is a weakness. Threat is an action which basically exploit the vulnerability. Then the outcome is called as a, risk. The outcome is called as a risk. Okay, like that. So understand that so basically in the cloud platform, understand that the cloud service customer is also called as data owner and data controller. I repeat, if you basically go for a cloud platform, the data owner is also called as data controller, or or the customer is basically called as owner and controller. And if you go to a cloud platform, the cloud service provider is basically the data custodian or data processor. Just understand this word. Okay. The second thing is that what are the different type of risk treatment methodologies? Okay, what are the different type of risk treatment methodologies? So team, when talking about risk treatment, we have mainly four types: risk acceptance, risk avoidance, risk transfer, risk mitigation. What is risk mitigation? Mitigation means that I am putting the various controls in place to reduce the risk to acceptable level, is called as risk mitigation. What is risk avoidance? I am avoiding the risk by not or I'm taking a different course of action, and I'm avoiding the risk. That's called as a risk avoidance. Then what is risk acceptance? If the risk is within the value which we can manage or we can tolerate, that is called as a acceptance. What is risk transfer? You're transferring certain risk to a a third party like a cloud service provider. Understand the four types of risk treatment methodologies, then understand the various type of risk. So basically understand that there are some multiple frameworks we have for risk assessment. You just has to understand, like ISO 31000, NIST risk management framework, COBIT is there. Like this, we have different framework for risk management. Just understand those. Okay, you don't have to memorize, just have to understand names, that's all. The next one is basically, and like when you basically go for a cloud platform, you have to clearly understand the business requirements. You have to basically understand the vendor management with the challenges. What are the reasons why we basically should have an effective contract management? All these things we already discussed in the various topics, so it will be easy for you. That's all. So then this is the whole things you have to understand in CCSP as a quick overview from today, yesterday onwards. So can we go for some simple questions, team, to understand the perspective? So whenever you basically go for the examination, team, I will tell you what you have to do. Okay. Whenever you get a question, don't read the question first. Always make sure you read the choices. My suggestion is that, team, when you basically go for the examination, always read the choices. Read all the choices. Okay. Then you read the entire question. Then you read the entire question. First, you read the choices. Then you read the entire question. So after this, see, when you read the question, you will get a complete idea of the context, and always focus on what they're asking you. Team, in this question, what they're asking you. In this question, this is what they're asking you, right? See, even though we read the entire question, don't bother about the scenario. You are not the one who has to worry about this or concern about this much. The only thing you have to worry about is what they're asking you. You are the cloud security architect for a large enterprise that has been utilizing a cloud service provider for several critical workloads. Due to change in the business strategy and evolving compliance requirements, the organization is concerned about the possibility of migrating its data and application to an alternate cloud provider if needed. Which of the following strategies and technologies is the most useful while ensuring the portability and reversibility, which would facilitate a smoother migration while minimizing the risk of vendor lock-in? So I want to make sure I'm able to have a portability with a less chance of vendor lock-in. Okay, I want to have a most useful way of ensuring portability with minimized risk of vendor lock-in. So the answer is I will go for a multi-cloud strategy. I will go for a multi-cloud strategy. See, even if you have a contract with a CSP team, it's not about securing the favorable pricing. Okay, I want the question talking most effective option. That means if you go for B, you can see that obviously I can basically have a reversibility because I can have a multiple cloud providers. I'm not depending on only one provider. Plus, I'm using containerization. What is the benefit of containerization? I can make sure that I'm able to have a I can have a complete independency because I can have a complete things package on a container. It can be moved to any platforms I want, right? So which will help us to have a complete portability. The answer is B. So Tim, can we go to next question? One more question. A global e-commerce company is planning to migrate its customer applications to the cloud. The company want to ensure that security and privacy of customer data while optimizing the performance of its applications. The security team is specifically concerned about the potential DDoS attacks and want to implement a solution that mitigates that impact of attacks in the cloud. In the context of migrating customer-facing applications from cloud, which which architecture design strategy is most efficient for mitigating the impact of those attacks, not mitigating those attacks, mitigating the impact of those attacks and ensuring the application performance. So team, if I basically go for D or C or B, that's basically not for the same thing. But if I go for A, what happens, team? If I go for C, what is the problem? IPS is basically a different thing. It's not for this, right? But it doesn't give me this, it doesn't give me the best option for optimizing the application performance and mitigating about those DDoS attacks, and it will increase the cost, right? I want to go for the most effective solution. So for that, for mitigating the impact of those attacks, I'll go for a WAF. Plus, also I'll go for a CDN. The benefit of CDN is that as we have a CDN there, it is getting distributed across the different locations, and the traffic will be the queries coming will be absorbed, okay, by the CDN. So it can help us to maintain the service. The answer is A. Okay, now team, let's go to a quick overview on just quick things you have to always keep in mind. Whenever you basically go for an examination team, there are some points we have to always keep in mind. Make sure whenever you basically go for the examination, the most important thing you have to keep in mind is that when you go for the examination, if you rush, the chance of the exam failing is high. So don't rush. So make sure for the examination perspective, you have to always make sure you take proper time. So take 1 minute for one question and use the entire time. You don't have to basically rush early and it doesn't give you a benefit. Use the proper time. Why do you want to rush? What is the reason you're rushing? No need. Okay. Take your proper amount of time. Second thing is that when you basically go for the examination, read the questions very carefully. Review the answers first, then the questions. Focus on the key points like what, when, both, most, best, except, first, least, like that. Those kind of things can basically change the entire answer. And use the and team, if you basically rush for the examination, what happens, team? The reason why the exam can be challenging is not because the exam is tough, because you will get exhausted because you have to remember all the concepts. So to make sure that instead of rushing through the all concepts and making it so much exhaustive, I would recommend you always, you know go through the, what we can say, go like just make sure take a proper time, take a proper breaks in between, like after let's say 50 questions, you take a 10 minutes break, sit idle there, just sit peacefully and sit idle there, then again go for the next set of questions. Like by doing that, you will get your brain giving some time to slow down for some time, so it will improve your performance. Okay, do not rush. And make sure you book the examination on the nearest PSNBU IC skill authorized exam center. Plus on the exam day, try to make sure that you prepare everything well, have your ID with you. It's a very important thing. And while you go for the examination, make sure you go through all the concepts one more time quickly. And in the examination, the only thing is that they will test a lot of your English skills and all, what I feel. So always make sure you read the question one or two times, but very very important, read the entire question. And the biggest challenge always feel is that team, you have to think like a manager. You don't have to you don't have to worry about how the technicality is there. Focus on more of a management perspective about your business, right? Like that.